The heavy oak door shuddered under a pounding fist at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. I did not need to check the peephole to know who was standing on my porch. My daughter only visited with that kind of urgency when her bank account hit zero. But tonight, she brought her husband and a demand for $900,000. I looked at the packed suitcase hidden in the hallway closet. They thought they were breaking me, but I was already gone. My name is Eleanor Hartman. I am 58 years old, and for the last 30 years, I have meticulously balanced ledgers for the Landstone Federal Auditing Bureau. Precision is my life. I know where every cent goes in a chaotic spreadsheet, and I know exactly when a deficit becomes insurmountable. The deficit in my personal life had been growing for decades, but I had chosen to ignore it until this specific Tuesday night in late October. The leaves were already turning brown in Crestwood Hills, drifting against the porch in the biting wind. I was sitting with a cup of chamomile tea, enjoying the rare silence of the house, when the doorbell rang. It was not a polite ring. It was a rapid, staccato assault that vibrated through the floorboards. I did not need to check the time to know it was past 9 o'clock at night. I did not need to look out the window to know who it was. Only one person rang my doorbell with that specific blend of panic and entitlement. My daughter, Clara. When I opened the heavy oak door, Clara pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. She was not alone. Mitchell Ward, her husband of 4 years, followed her inside. He did not wipe his boots on the mat. He walked with the heavy, arrogant stride of a man who owned the place, or perhaps a man who believed the world owed him the ground he walked on. "Mom, it is freezing out there," Clara said, rubbing her arms. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, the same look she used when she was 10 and wanted a new bicycle. But the innocence was gone. Beneath the layers of designer makeup, I saw the hard, calculating glint of a woman who viewed me not as a mother, but as an endless line of credit. Mitchell and I. "We need to talk to you." "It is urgent," Clara added, her voice trembling slightly. It was a performance. I had seen it 100 times. We sat in the living room. Mitchell did not sit. He paced, finally. He slammed a thick folder of documents onto my mahogany coffee table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "We are in a hole. Eleanor, a big one," Mitchell said, staring down at me. "And you are the only one who can fix it." I looked at the papers. Gambling debts, failed business ventures, high-interest personal loans. The total figure at the bottom of the summary page made my stomach turn. $900,000. "You expect me to pay this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the shock. "You have the retirement fund. You have the equity in this house," Mitchell replied, his tone devoid of shame. "If I do not pay these people by Friday, well, let us just say they do not file lawsuits. They break legs, and they know where you live. Eleanor, if they cannot find me, they might come looking for the woman with the assets." I looked at Clara, waiting for her to defend me, to tell her husband that threatening her mother was unacceptable. Instead, she leaned forward, grabbing my hand with clammy fingers. "Mom, you have to help us. You owe me this," Clara whispered, squeezing my hand tightly. "Remember when you were working all those late nights when I was a kid? You were never there. You bought my love with toys then, so why stop now? You made me who I am. You cannot just abandon us when we are drowning." Something inside me snapped. It was a quiet fracture. invisible to the naked eye. For years, I had believed that love meant giving until you were empty. But looking at Clara, I realized I was not looking at a daughter. I was looking at a bill collector. "If I pay this," I said slowly, "will it be the last time?" "Of course," Mitchell said, though his eyes shifted away. "Just sign the transfer papers. We need the liquid cash immediately." I stood up. I felt strangely calm, the way I felt when I finally balanced a difficult audit. "I cannot authorize a transfer of this magnitude tonight. The banks are closed," I said. "Leave the papers. Go home. I will handle it tomorrow." Clara let out a breath she had been holding. "Thank you, Mom. I knew you would not let us down." They left as quickly as they had arrived, confident that their ATM had dispensed the cash once again. I locked the deadbolt behind them. I looked at the papers on the table, then at the hallway closet where my suitcase was already packed. I would indeed handle it tomorrow, but not in the way they thought. I stood in the silence of my living room, the echo of the front door slamming still vibrating in the air. The house felt too big, too empty, and entirely too cold. For 30 years, this house had been my fortress. It was where I had rebuilt my life after Clara's father packed his bags and left me with a 2-year-old toddler and a mountain of insecurity. I looked at the family photos lining the mantelpiece, capturing moments that felt like they belonged to a different lifetime. There was Clara at 5, grinning with chocolate cake smeared across her cheeks. There she was, at 10, holding a spelling bee trophy I had coached her to win. She had been such a gentle child, the kind who would cry if she stepped on a snail. But as I stared at those frozen memories, a bitter taste rose in my throat. I had spent 3 decades trying to compensate for the absence of a father. I worked double shifts at the bureau, missed school plays to secure promotions, and bought her whatever she pointed at because I could not bear to see her unhappy. I thought I was giving her the world. In reality, I was teaching her that love was a transaction and that my primary function was to provide. The change was subtle at first, but then Mitchell Ward crashed into our lives like a hurricane. He was handsome in a flashy, superficial way, filled with ambitious stories about startups and investments that never seemed to materialize. I saw through him immediately. He was a predator looking for a host. But Clara saw a prince. She defended him with a ferocity that terrified me. I paid for their wedding. I paid for the down payment on their house. I paid off his first credit card debt because Clara cried and said he was just unlucky. "Mum, please. He is trying so hard. You just do not see it," she had said back then, tears streaming down her face. I believed her tears then. Now, I realized those tears were just another currency. Every happy memory I held onto was tainted. The family vacations where I footed the bill, the surprise gifts, the bailouts, they were not moments of connection. They were deposits in a bank account that never accrued interest. I tried to recall the last time Clara had called me just to ask how I was doing. I racked my brain, searching for a conversation that did not end with a request for a wire transfer. There was none. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I walked over to the window and watched their taillights disappear down the street. I had created this. I had watered the seeds of her entitlement until they grew into vines that were now strangling me. Clara was no longer the victim of Mitchell's influence. She had become his perfect counterpart. The way she had looked at me tonight, cold and expectant, was exactly how he looked at the world. She did not love me. She loved what I could give her. If I signed those papers tomorrow, I would be destitute. At 58. I would lose the security I had spent a lifetime building. I would be working until the day I died, just to keep a roof over my head, while they drained me dry and moved on to the next victim. I looked at the reflection of my face in the dark glass. I looked tired. I looked used. No more. I whispered to the empty room. I am done. I was not just refusing to pay a debt. I was refusing to participate in my own destruction. The checkbook remained in the drawer. The savings account remained locked. I turned away from the window and walked toward the hallway closet. I did not feel the crushing weight of guilt that usually accompanied saying no to Clara. Instead, I felt a terrifying, exhilarating clarity. I was not going to fix this for her. I was going to break the cycle, even if it meant breaking my own heart in the process. The moment the taillights of Mitchell's car vanished around the corner, the trembling in my hands ceased. I did not collapse. I did not cry. I reached for my phone and dialed the number for Jeffrey Lowell. He was not just my attorney. He was the only person who had warned me about this day 20 years ago. It was late, but he answered on the first ring. Jeffrey. They came, I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. It is exactly as you predicted. Are you safe? Jeffrey asked immediately. His voice was sharp with concern. Did he hurt you? Not physically, I replied, walking rapidly toward my home office. But they want everything. They are in debt. Nearly $1 million. They demanded I cover it. Jeffrey. Execute the contingency plan. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the rustle of paper. I have the file right here on my desk, Jeffrey said, his tone shifting to professional steel. I hoped we would never have to use it, but I am ready. Give the word. Do it. I commanded. Lock it all down. I hung up and opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dark room. I began the digital demolition of my old life. I accessed the joint accounts I had kept open for emergencies, the ones Clara used for her groceries that were actually designer shoes. With 3 clicks, I froze them. I transferred the entirety of my liquid savings into the irrevocable trust Jeffrey and I had established 5 years ago. Every dollar I had ever given Clara was documented as a non-refundable gift in my tax filings. She had no claim to my estate, the house she grew up in, the car she drove occasionally, the cottage in the back, none of it was in her name. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I was not a mother anymore. I was an auditor closing a bankrupt account. Next. I opened the security system application. The cameras in the living room had recorded everything. I scrubbed through the footage until I found the moment Mitchell leaned over the table. His face twisted. I turned the volume up. If I do not pay these people by Friday, well, let us just say they do not file lawsuits. They break legs. I downloaded the clip. It was blackmail. It was a threat. And it was my insurance policy. I found a plain cardboard box in the study. Into it. I placed a USB drive containing the video file. Next, I added a thick stack of printed spreadsheets. It was the itemized list of every single check, wire transfer, and cash withdrawal I had given them over the last decade. It totaled $912,000. I added the legal notice Jeffrey had just emailed me, a document stating that any further contact would be considered harassment. I took a piece of stationery and wrote 5 words. My hand did not shake. Not betrayal. This is the truth. I placed the note on top of the pile and sealed the box. The house was silent. I did not look back at the photos on the mantel. I grabbed the suitcase I had packed 2 days ago when I first noticed the suspicious inquiries on my credit report. I walked to the front door and set the box on the welcome mat. It was the only thing I was leaving them. I locked the door and keyed in the security code. Then, I took my smartphone. I removed the SIM card and snapped it in half. I dropped the pieces into the decorative vase by the door. A taxi was waiting at the end of the driveway. I had called it using a burner phone I bought last week. I slid into the back seat, keeping my head down. "Where to?" the driver asked. "The airport," I said. "International terminal." "And please?" "Drive fast." 2 hours later, I was seated in row 12 of a red-eye flight headed west. The engines roared to life, pressing me back against the seat. As the plane lifted off the tarmac, leaving Crestwood Hills far below in the darkness, I did not feel fear. I looked out the window at the shrinking lights of the city where I had spent my entire adult life. I was disappearing. For the first time in 30 years, I was not Eleanor the mother or Eleanor the auditor. I was a ghost, and I was finally free. Port Haven was exactly as I remembered it from a magazine spread I had clipped 15 years ago and hidden in the back of my recipe binder. It was a small coastal town where the air tasted of salt and the wind carried the scent of drying seaweed. I stepped out of the taxi and stood in front of the small, weathered cottage I had rented sight unseen. It was nothing like the sprawling 2-story colonial I had left behind in Crestwood Hills. The paint was peeling slightly on the shutters, and the porch listed to the left. But as I inhaled the sharp, cold ocean air, I felt my lungs expand fully for the first time in years. "It is small," the property manager said, handing me the keys with a skeptical look. "Are you sure this is what you are looking for?" "It is perfect," I replied. "Absolutely perfect." Inside, the house smelled of cedar and old books. I unpacked my suitcase, but as I pulled out my tailored wool blazers and silk scarves, they looked ridiculous in this new setting. These were the costumes of Eleanor the auditor, the woman who had to look successful so her daughter could brag about her. I shoved the expensive fabrics into a trash bag. I would drop them at the local charity shop in the morning. I did not want to wear anything that touched my skin in that other life. That first night, I expected to toss and turn. I expected the phantom sound of the doorbell to wake me up, terrified that Mitchell had found me. Instead, the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the shore acted like a lullaby. I slept for 10 straight hours. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through the sheer curtains, and for a terrifying moment, I did not know where I was. Then, the realization washed over me. I was safe. I made coffee in a chipped mug I found in the cupboard. I sat on the back deck, watching the grey water churn. There was no schedule to keep. There were no urgent text messages demanding a transfer of funds. There was just the ocean. My burner phone buzzed at noon. It was Jeffrey, Eleanor. "Are you there?" His voice crackled through the connection. "I am here." "Jeffrey," I said, leaning back against the wooden railing. "Is it done?" "It is done," Jeffrey confirmed. I could hear the relief in his tone. "I filed the paperwork the moment the courts opened this morning. The trust is sealed. The liens are active. Mitchell. He cannot touch a single penny. If he tries to access the accounts, he will trigger a fraud alert that goes straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." "Thank you," I whispered, my throat tightening. I do not know how to thank you." Just live. Eleanor, you have earned it, he said softly before hanging up. I sat there for a long time, watching a seagull dive into the water. A pang of guilt tried to rise in my chest. I imagined Clara crying. I imagined her panic when the credit cards were declined. Was I a monster for abandoning my child? But then I remembered the look in her eyes the night before. It was not the look of a frightened child needing her mother. It was the look of a manager dealing with an uncooperative employee. I had not abandoned her. I had fired her. That afternoon, I bought a thick, leather-bound journal from a stationery store on Main Street. I sat on a bench overlooking the pier and uncapped my pen. I had spent so long keeping secrets, hiding my resentment to keep the peace. Now, the paper was the only thing that needed to hear me. I wrote about the loneliness. I wrote about the financial abuse. I wrote about the day I realized my daughter loved my wallet more than she loved me. I am not running away. I wrote, the ink dark against the white page. I am finally running toward myself. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and orange, a single question lingered in the back of my mind. It was not a question of regret, but of curiosity. Back in Crestwood Hills, the sun would be setting too. Clara and Mitchell would be pulling into the driveway right about now, expecting a check. Instead, they would find a locked door and a cardboard box. I wondered if Clara would scream. I wondered if she would cry. But mostly, I wondered if, when she opened that box, she would finally see herself the way I had seen her last night. I had one final tether to my old life, a single digital thread I had not yet severed. Sitting in the dim light of my rental cottage in Port Haven, I opened the security application on my tablet. I needed to see this. I needed to witness the moment the cord was finally cut. The screen flickered to life, showing the front porch of my home in Crestwood Hills. The timestamp read 7 o'clock in the evening, right on schedule. A black sedan pulled into the driveway. Mitchell stepped out first, slamming the door with unnecessary force. He looked agitated, pacing back and forth on the concrete walkway while Clara struggled to get out of the passenger side. She looked pale, her movements jerky and anxious. They walked up the steps to the front door, expecting a surrender. They expected a check that would erase their mistakes. "Ring it again," Mitchell commanded, his voice tinny through the camera microphone. "She is probably sitting in there crying." Clara pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed, but the house remained dark and silent. She tried the handle. Locked. She tried her key, but it would not turn. I had the tumblers changed 3 hours before I left. "Mom," Clara called out, pressing her face against the glass sidelight. "Mom, open the door. We are here." That was when Mitchell saw the box. It was sitting innocently on the welcome mat, sealed with heavy packing tape. He nudged it with the toe of his expensive boot. "What is that?" he asked. Clara knelt down. Maybe she left the paperwork in here. She said she would handle it." She tore the tape open. I leaned closer to my tablet screen, watching her face. She reached inside and pulled out the thick stack of papers. She bypassed the note I had written and went straight for what she thought was the financial salvation. But instead of a cashier's check, she found the ledger. Clara frowned, flipping through the pages under the yellow light of the porch lantern. This is not a check," Clara said, her voice trembling. "It is a list. It is just dates and numbers." "Give me that," Mitchell snapped, snatching the papers from her hands. He scanned the first page. I knew exactly what he was seeing. Every tuition payment, every car repair, every bailout, every loan that was never repaid. $912,000? Mitchell read aloud, his face twisting in confusion. Why the hell did she write down $912,000? Look at the bottom, I whispered to the empty room in Port Haven. Mitchell flipped to the next item in the box. It was the USB drive. He pulled a laptop from his messenger bag. He had brought it to facilitate an immediate wire transfer and shoved the drive into the port. He balanced the computer on the porch railing. The audio file began to play. The quality was crisp. It was the recording of our conversation from the night before. If I do not pay these people by Friday, well, let us just say they do not file lawsuits. They break legs. Mitchell froze. He looked up at the camera lens, realizing for the first time that he was being watched. But the recording continued. Mom, you have to help us. You owe me this. You made me who I am. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Hearing her own voice, stripped of the moment's desperation, seemed to hit her harder than any slap. She sounded petulant. She sounded cruel. Turn it off, Clara whispered. Mitchell, turn it off. But Mitchell was already digging for the next document. He pulled out the folder labeled Liabilities. These were the papers my private investigator had unearthed. The gambling debts in Las Vegas, the loans from loan sharks in Atlantic City, the list of dangerous men he actually owed money to, men who had nothing to do with legitimate business. You said it was a business investment, Clara said, her voice rising in pitch. She looked at the paper, then at her husband. You told me the market crashed. You lost it at the tables. Shut up, Clara, Mitchell hissed, sweat visible on his forehead. Where is the asset transfer? Where is the deed to the house? He dumped the rest of the box onto the porch floor. The final document fluttered to the top. It was the legal notice from Jeffrey. Notice of asset protection and disinheritance. Mitchell read it, his lips moving silently. Then he crumpled the paper in his fist and kicked the front door. She locked it all, Mitchell screamed, his composure shattering completely. The trust is irrevocable. The house is not in your name. She cut us off. She cut us off completely. Clara stood motionless amidst the scattered papers. She picked up the legal notice Mitchell had thrown down. She read the words that confirmed she owned nothing. The house she grew up in, the safety net she had treated as a hammock, it was all gone. She left, Clara said, her voice barely audible. Then, the realization seemed to claw its way up her throat. She was not screaming because she was poor. She was screaming because the mirror had finally been held up to her face. She left us, Clara shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. Mitchell, she really left. She knows. She knows everything. I watched as Clara sank to her knees, surrounded by the receipts of her own selfishness. She looked at the camera one last time, her mascara running down her cheeks, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen in her before. Mom! She screamed at the unblinking lens. Mom! Please! I closed the application. The screen went black. The silence in my cottage was heavy, but it was peaceful. The tether was cut. I placed the tablet on the table and walked out onto the deck to listen to the ocean. While I was walking along the beach in Port Haven, breathing in air that didn't taste like obligation, The life I left behind in Crestwood Hills was imploding with the violence of a controlled demolition. I learned later that the silence of my empty house did not last long after the camera feed cut out. On the front porch, the shock had worn off, replaced by a venomous panic. Mitchell turned on Clara, his face flushed with a dangerous mixture of fear and rage. He kicked the box of documents again, scattering my carefully organized records across the driveway. "You said she was a sure thing," Mitchell shouted, his voice cracking. "You told me she was soft, that she would never let her precious little girl suffer." I thought she was," Clara stammered, backing away from him until her spine hit the brick wall of the house. "She has never done this before. She has never said no to me. Never." Mitchell ran a hand through his hair, pacing in tight, frantic circles. "Well, she said no tonight, and she did it with a $900,000 middle finger. Do you have any idea what this means? Do you know who I owe this money to?" Before Clara could answer, Mitchell's phone began to ring. It was a generic ringtone, but the sound made him jump as if he had been shot. He looked at the screen, and all the colour drained from his face. He answered it, his arrogance vanishing instantly. "Hello, look." "I need more time," Mitchell whispered into the phone, his voice trembling. I had a setback. The funds are tied up in a trust. Just give me 48 hours. Please. I am good for it." He listened for a moment, his eyes widening, then lowered the phone slowly. The line had gone dead. He looked at Clara with pure hatred. "They are not waiting." He spat. Clara, in a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, pulled out her phone and dialed my number again. She called 5 times in a row. Each time, she was met with the same automated recording stating that the number was no longer in service. "She cut the line," Clara said, her voice hollow. She actually cut the line. The next morning, Clara drove to the Landstone Federal Auditing Bureau. She marched up to the reception desk, demanding to see me, assuming I was hiding behind my mahogany desk as usual. "I am sorry, Mrs. Ward," the receptionist told her, likely with a pitying look. "Eleanor submitted her paperwork yesterday. She is on indefinite leave. She did not leave a forwarding address or a contact number. But she cannot just disappear." Clara screamed, causing the security guard to step forward. "She is my mother." "It appears she can," the receptionist replied coolly. The final blow came at lunch. Clara tried to buy a coffee and a sandwich at a cafe near my office to calm her nerves. When she swiped the joint credit card, the one I had paid off every month for 10 years, the machine beeped a harsh rejection tone. "Declined," the barista said. Clara checked the banking app on her phone. The account balance was 0. The overdraft protection was disabled. The secondary card attached to my savings account was listed as invalid. She drove home in a daze, the gaslight on her dashboard flickering a warning she could not afford to heed. When she walked into the house, she shared with Mitchell. She found him zipping up a large duffel bag in the living room. Mitchell, Clara asked, her voice shaking. What are you doing? I am leaving," Mitchell said without looking at her. "I cannot stay here. If those guys come looking for me, I need to be hard to find. And you are useless to me right now. You are leaving me." Clara gasped, tears spilling over. "But we are married. You said we were partners. We were partners when you had a mother who paid the bills." Mitchell sneered, slinging the bag over his shoulder. Now you are just a woman with a mountain of debt and no assets. Fix this. Clara. Find her. Get the money. Until then, do not bother calling me. He walked out the door, leaving it wide open. Clara stood in the center of the living room. For the first time in her life, the silence around her was not peaceful. It was terrifying. She had no money. She had no husband. She had no mother to call to fix it. She realized with a sickening jolt that she had never actually feared poverty or loneliness because she had treated me as her permanent insurance policy. Mom. She whispered to the empty room, her legs giving out as she sank to the floor. Mom. I am scared. But this time, nobody was coming to pick her up. Clara treated my departure like a bookkeeping error that simply needed to be reconciled. For the first 3 days, she did not grieve. She investigated. She pulled every dusty file from my home office, searching for a paper trail I might have carelessly left behind. She logged into old credit card portals, hoping to find a charge for a hotel, a gas station, or a flight that would betray my location. But I had been an auditor for 30 years. I knew how to scrub a ledger clean. Every account she checked led to a digital dead end or a balance of zero. Desperate. She went to the Crestwood Hills police station. I can imagine her standing at the front desk, feigning the concern of a worried daughter rather than a cut-off dependent. Officer. My mother is missing. She pleaded, likely squeezing out a few tears. She has been gone for 72 hours. She's not answering her phone. Something terrible might have happened. The police did their job. They ran my name. They saw the flight manifest. They saw the note I had left with Jeffrey. Mrs. Ward, your mother is not missing. The sergeant told her, his tone flat. She boarded a plane under her own power. She is a 58-year-old woman with no history of dementia. She has the right to travel without informing you. Go home. Rejected by the law. Clara drove to Jeffrey's office. She stormed past his secretary, demanding answers. Jeffrey, sitting behind his desk with the calmness of a man holding all the aces, did not blink. Where is she? Jeffrey Clara demanded. I know you know. Tell me right now or I will sue you for obstruction. You will do no such thing. Jeffrey replied, closing a file folder. Your mother instructed me to tell you one thing. She is living her own life. That is all you get. She is safe, she is healthy, and she does not wish to be disturbed. Defeated. Clara returned to my empty house. She wandered through the rooms like a ghost haunting a graveyard. In her search for financial documents, she had overturned a box of old keepsakes in the attic. Amidst the clutter, she found a worn, spiral-bound notebook. It was not a ledger. It was a diary I had kept when she was a teenager, a habit I had abandoned until recently. Clara sat on the dusty floor and opened it. She expected to read mundane details about grocery lists or work deadlines. Instead, she found the raw, bleeding edge of my heart. August 12th, 2005. She read, I wanted to leave today. I packed a bag while she was at school. I cannot do this anymore. The loneliness is eating me alive. But then Clara came home, smiling about her test score, and I unpacked. I cannot leave her. She needs me. I will stay. I will always stay for her. Clara turned the pages, her hands trembling. She read entry after entry detailing the sacrifices I had made, not the money, but the emotional cost. She read about the dates I cancelled, the promotions I turned down. The silent nights I spent crying in the bathroom so she would not hear. Then she reached the final entry, written the night before I left. I have given her everything. My money, my youth, my happiness. If I stay one more day, I will die. Not physically, but my soul will simply cease to exist. I am leaving not to hurt her, but to save what is left of me. Tomorrow, I am about to breathe. For the first time, the narrative Clara had constructed that I was a selfish mother abandoning her child shattered. She realized that my presence had been a shield she had battered for decades. I had not left to punish her. I had left because I was drowning, and she was the anchor. The sound of the front door opening snapped her out of her trance. Mitchell had returned. He looked disheveled, his eyes wild with the frantic energy of a gambler who had lost his last chip. "Clara," he shouted, storming into the house. "I need money. Now. I know you have jewelry. I know there is silver in the dining room. We can pawn it." He grabbed a silver candlestick from the sideboard. "Put it down," Clara said. Her voice was quiet, but it was made of steel. "What did you say to me?" Mitchell sneered, turning on her. "I need $5,000 by tonight or I'm dead meat. Give me your ring." Clara looked at the man she had chosen over me. She looked at the diary in her lap. "No," she said, standing up. I said no. "You useless," Mitchell lunged forward, raising his hand. But he stopped when he saw the look in her eyes. It was not fear. It was total, desolate emptiness. "Get out," Clara whispered. "There is no money. Mitchell, the bank is closed. Mom is gone. And I am done." Mitchell threw the candlestick against the wall, denting the plaster. He screamed insults that would have broken the old Clara, but she just stood there, numb. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Clara stood in the silence that followed. It was absolute. No husband, no mother, no money, no safety net. She looked around the house that was no longer a home, and the terrifying weight of freedom crushed down on her. She was finally the only person responsible for her own life, and she was entirely alone. 3 weeks into my new life in Port Haven, I secured a job that would have made the old Eleanor laugh in disbelief. I became a part-time assistant at the municipal library. For 30 years, I had managed audits worth millions of dollars, navigating high-stakes corporate tax laws. Now, my biggest responsibility was ensuring the romance novels were alphabetized by author. The pay was minimum wage, but the peace was priceless. The library was the center of a community I was slowly beginning to understand. I joined a Tuesday morning support group for seniors, though I mostly listened. For the first time in decades, I was surrounded by people who wanted nothing from me. When Mrs. Higgins brought me a basket of lemons from her garden, I instinctively reached for my purse to pay her. "Put that away." "Eleanor," she scolded gently. "It is just lemons. Take them and make a pie." I stared at the yellow fruit in my hands. It was a gift with no strings attached. There was no invoice. There was no expectation of a return favor. It was terrifyingly simple. I began to reclaim the small spaces of my life. In the evenings, I cooked meals that Clara would have turned her nose up at: simple stews, roasted vegetables, things that nourished me. I bought a cheap harmonica from a pawn shop and sat on my back porch, making terrible, wheezing sounds until they slowly started to resemble a melody. I bought flowers, cheap daisies from the market, and arranged them in jars on the windowsill, not to impress guests, but just because I liked the color. Yet, the ghost of my daughter still sat in the corner of the room. Every night, I took out a notepad and wrote to her. Dear Clara, today I saw a girl who looked like you. Dear Clara, I am sorry I taught you that love was something you bought. I wrote dozens of letters, pouring out the anger, the apology, and the grief. Then, I folded them and locked them in a drawer. Sending them would only reopen the wound. Writing them allowed me to clean it out. My therapist, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Evans, challenged me during our session on Thursday. You still feel like a fugitive, she observed. I feel like I abandoned my post. I admitted, looking at my hands. A mother is supposed to endure, right, no matter what. Eleanor, Dr. Evans said, leaning forward, you did not abandon her. You stopped enabling her destruction. Freedom is not selfishness. Sometimes, it is the only way to survive. It was a lesson I was struggling to learn, especially when Samuel entered the picture. Samuel was a local carpenter, a man in his early 60s with sawdust permanently dusting his flannel shirts and a smile that reached his eyes. He had come to the library to fix a broken shelf in the biography section. Over the course of a week, he started finding reasons to talk to me. One afternoon, he waited for me by the checkout desk as I was clocking out. Eleanor? He started, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I was wondering if you might want to get coffee. The diner down the street makes a blueberry pie that is almost as sweet as you. It was clumsy, and it was charming. My instinct was to smile. But then the old fear spiked the fear of being needed, of being used, of opening a door that I could not close. I saw Mitchell's charm. I saw Clara's manipulation. I stepped back, clutching my purse to my chest like a shield. Samuel, that is very kind, I said, my voice steady but distant. But I cannot. It is just coffee. Samuel said gently. No pressure. It is not about the coffee. I replied. I am rebuilding a house that burned down, Samuel. I am not ready to invite anyone in yet. I do not know if I ever will be. He looked at me for a long moment. And unlike the men in my past, he did not get angry. He did not push. I understand, he said, tipping his cap. If you ever get the roof back on that house, let me know. I am pretty good with repairs. He walked away, leaving me standing in the cool evening air. I walked to the beach alone, as I did every night. I watched the tide roll in, relentless and steady. I was alone. But for the first time, I did not feel lonely. I was learning to enjoy the company of the one person I had neglected for 58 years myself. Back in Crestwood Hills, the facade of Clara's life was stripping away like old paint. The silence in the house was no longer terrifying. It was echoing with the reality of her poverty. To keep the lights on, Clara had to do the unthinkable. She opened her closet, not to dress up, but to liquidate. Her collection of designer handbags, purchased with the supplementary credit cards I had unknowingly paid for years, went to a consignment shop downtown. I can give you $2,000 for the lot, the shop owner said, looking over the Chanel and Louis Vuitton bags with a critical eye. But they are worth 10 times that, Clara stammered, clutching the leather strap of a purse she had received for her 25th birthday. Not used? They are not, the woman replied indifferently. Take it or leave it. Clara took the cash. It felt light in her hand, sickeningly insufficient. For the first time in her life, my daughter filled out a job application. She did not have a resume. She did not have references. She landed a job as a sales associate at a department store, earning $15 an hour, standing on her feet for 8 hours a day, folding clothes for customers who looked through her as if she were furniture. Clara began to understand the weight of a dollar. She realized that the $900 she used to spend on a casual dinner represented 60 hours of human labor. One night, exhausted and eating instant noodles in the dim light of the kitchen. Clara returned to the box I had left on the porch. She had been too angry to look at it closely before. Now, she was looking for answers. She dug past the bank statements and found a document she had missed. It was a notarized agreement, dated 3 years ago. It was signed by Mitchell. Mitchell Ward, acknowledge that all debts accrued under my name are my sole responsibility and that Eleanor Hartman has no legal obligation. Clara froze. She remembered that date. It was the day Mitchell had told her he was closing a big deal with me. He hadn't been closing a deal. I had forced him to sign a confession to protect Clara's future inheritance from his creditors. She knew. Clara whispered to the empty room. She knew what he was, and she still protected me. The realization hit her harder than the hunger. I hadn't just been a bank, I had been a shield, and she had spent years handing the knife to the man who wanted to stab me, driven by a sudden need to understand. Clara went into my old study. She pulled down my collection of travel books, the ones she used to mock as dust collectors. A folded map fell out of a guide to the East Coast. It was a map of New England, soft and worn at the creases. There was a red circle drawn around a small town called Port Haven, with a note in my handwriting someday. Clara traced the circle with her finger. She had never asked me what I wanted to do when I retired. She had never asked me anything. The next day, Clara went to the law firm to beg for my contact information one last time. She was waiting in the hallway when she overheard a junior associate talking on the phone. Yes, Mrs. Hartman planned this exit strategy for over 12 months. She wanted to make sure her daughter was not liable for the husband's fraud before she left. It was a rescue mission. Really. Clara leaned against the wall, the breath leaving her lungs. I hadn't left in a fit of rage. I hadn't left to punish her. I had spent a year meticulously constructing a lifeboat for her, waiting until the moment I knew she wouldn't drown before I jumped ship. She walked home in a daze, her heart breaking under the weight of her own guilt. When she arrived, she found Mitchell sitting on the front steps. He looked haggard, his expensive suit rumpled and stained. "Clara," he said, standing up, a desperate grin plastered on his face. "Baby, I have a plan. I just need you to sign a small loan. Just $5,000. I can flip it. We can get everything back." Clara looked at him. She saw the sweat on his upper lip. She saw the lie in his eyes. For the first time, she did not see a partner. She saw a parasite. "No," Clara said. Her voice was quiet, but it was made of steel. "What did you say?" Mitchell stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "You need me. You have nothing. I have nothing because of you," Clara replied, stepping past him to unlock the door. "And because I let you take it, get off my porch. Mitchell, if you come back, I will call the police and show them the confession you signed for my mother." Mitchell's face turned pale. He spat on the ground, cursed her name, and walked away into the darkness. He knew, just as Clara did, that the well was finally dry. Clara went inside and packed a bag, not with designer clothes, but with jeans, sweaters, and the map. She did not want to stay in the house that reminded her of her failures. She had a destination now. "I am not going to ask for money," Clara said to the silence, wiping a tear from her cheek. I just need to tell her I am sorry." She locked the door to the empty house, got into her car, and turned the ignition. She pointed the wheels east, toward the ocean, toward Port Haven, and toward the only truth she had left. The autumn wind in Port Haven was brisk, but for the first time in my life, it did not make me shiver. I was standing outside the library, helping Mrs. Higgins set up a table for the weekend book fair. Samuel was there too, making a joke about how heavy the boxes of romance novels were. I threw my head back and laughed, a genuine, loud sound that felt foreign but wonderful coming from my throat. Then I felt eyes on me. I stopped laughing and turned toward the street, standing near the old oak tree, clutching a map that looked like it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times, was Clara. But it was not the Clara I had left behind in Crestwood Hills. That Clara wore silk and disdain. This woman wore a faded denim jacket and jeans that looked worn at the knees. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, devoid of the expensive salon blowouts she used to demand weekly. She was watching me, tears streaming silently down her face. She looked small. She looked terrified. My first instinct was to run. My second was to put up a wall. I stiffened, dropping the book I was holding. Samuel noticed the shift in my demeanor immediately. "Eleanor," he asked softly, "is everything all right? I do not know yet," I replied, never taking my eyes off my daughter. Clara did not rush toward me. She hesitated, looking as if she wanted to turn around and flee. She saw me laughing. She saw me happy. And the realization seemed to break her heart right there on the sidewalk. She realized I had built a life that did not require her permission or her presence. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she stepped forward. She walked slowly, like someone approaching a wild animal that might bite. When she was 3 feet away, she stopped. "Mom," she whispered. Her voice cracked. I saw you laughing. You looked so beautiful." I folded my arms across my chest. I did not smile. "Hello, Clara. How did you find me?" "The map," she said, holding up the tattered paper. "I found the map in your study. The one with the red circle. And why are you here?" I asked, my voice cool. "Did the money run out?" "Clara, did Mitchell send you to see if the well has refilled?" Clara flinched, as if I had slapped her. She looked down at her scuffed sneakers. "Mitchell is gone," she said quietly. "I kicked him out. I sold my bags. I sold the furniture. I got a job. Mom, I work at a department store. I stand on my feet for 8 hours a day for $15 an hour." She looked up, and her eyes were raw with a pain that felt authentic. "I finally read your diary," she continued, a sob escaping her throat. "I read about how lonely you were. I read about how I bled you dry. I am so sorry, Mom. Not because I am broke, but because I broke you. I was a monster." I looked at her. I searched for the lie, for the manipulation. But all I saw was a young woman who was exhausted and humbled. "I am not going to pay your debts, Clara," I said firmly. "I meant what I wrote. I am not coming back to Crestwood Hills." "I know," Clara said, wiping her face with her sleeve. "I do not want you to come back. I do not want your money. I drove here on a tank of gas I paid for myself just to tell you that you were right to leave. You saved yourself. And And by leaving, you forced me to save myself too. She took a step back, preparing to walk away. That is all. I just wanted you to know. My heart, which I had encased in iron for weeks, finally cracked open. I saw the little girl who used to bring me dandelions. I saw the daughter who had been lost to greed, finally fighting her way back to the surface. Clara, I called out. She stopped and turned. Did you come here because you need a banker? I asked, my voice softening. Or did you come here because you need a mother? Clara began to weep in earnest, her shoulders shaking. I just want to be your daughter. I want to be the daughter you deserved. I do not want to take anything anymore. I closed the distance between us. I did not do it out of obligation. I did it out of love. I wrapped my arms around her, and she collapsed against me, holding on as if I were the only solid thing in the universe. I held her, smelling the ocean air and the faint scent of the cheap shampoo she was now using. I forgive you, I whispered into her hair. We stood there for a long time while the town of Port Haven moved around us. When we finally pulled apart, I wiped a tear from her cheek. I am hungry, I said, picking up the book I had dropped. And there is a diner down the street that serves the best clam chowder you have ever tasted. I am buying. But tomorrow you are applying for a library card. Clara laughed, a watery, broken sound that was filled with hope. Okay, she said. Okay, Mum. We walked down the street together, not as a provider and a dependent, but as two women walking side by side. I had lost a fortune to get here. But as I looked at Clara, I knew I had gained something far more valuable. I had taught us both the hardest lesson of all sometimes. You have to disappear completely to finally be found. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please drop a comment down below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on Clara's journey. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Grandma's Family Diary. Smash that like button and hit the hype button so we can share this story with even more people.